I would like to ask you a question. Should atheists study the Bible? For me, personally, I think the answer is yes, they should. And I'm going to tell you in this video today some of the reasons that I think that, and then I'm going to give a list of books for secular scholarship. This doesn't mean anti-religious, this doesn't mean atheistic scholarship, it means secular. This is not going towards any particular religious viewpoint. It doesn't require that you believe in any god or gods. So I'm going to give the list of books after I'm done telling you why I think it's important that atheists should study the Bible. First reason is that the Bible is arguably the most important and influential book in history. I think it would just be helpful for anybody to try to understand it in its historical context. What I mean by that is not to understand it in a way that you can personally gain something from it, like some moral of the story kind of stuff. That's not exactly what I mean. What I mean is actually understanding why the authors wrote what they wrote and when they wrote it. And that requires a lot of historical analysis. It requires conjunction with archaeology. It requires a lot of textual variation and a huge textual history and tradition. And it's a really complicated field, but because the text is so important, I think it would serve everybody well if they at least had some rudimentary understanding of how these things came to be. And think of it this way. The Bible is another way to look at history. It's not exactly history. I mean, the Bible is a whole bunch of books, some of which are of the historical genre, but all in all, it's not a history, it's not a science book, it's none of those things. It is a compilation of many different genres of text. And if you want to, especially for the atheists, if you want to actually criticize it, your criticisms should be accurate. You don't have to resort to making things up to disprove the Bible. So I think it would be very important for understanding another lens that people viewed their own different situations through. I think it would be very useful to understand that lens. And remember that when I'm talking about a lens, it's just the way the authors saw the world. You don't have to agree with them, and that's fine. I don't. And you don't have to think there's some God behind it. I don't. But it gives you another lens through which you can view history. I'm not here to say the Bible contains no inaccuracies. I'm not saying that it's perfect, because it's not. It's far from perfect. But we can get something historical out of it, whether that be an idea, a tradition, perhaps some historical person or event. This is another view. There are things in the Bible which are true, but they are not true because they're in the Bible. For example, the Assyrian invasion. We know that happened. Shoshanks, or in the Bible, Shishak's invasion, that happened. The Babylonian exile, that happened. These are all things that are recorded in the Bible as well as other places, and these things happened. Their truth value doesn't come from the fact that they're in the Bible, but they are true, and it shows you a different perspective, the way that these specific people were looking at these events. So that's number one. It's the most influential, arguably the most influential, whatever you want to say, book in history. And it would serve us well to understand it. Second, and this is actually what kind of got me leading down this journey, and it kind of changed over time. I'll get into it, and it's going to lead into point 3. So point number 2 is that if you are an atheist and you are looking to engage with Christians and you're looking to have a good conversation with your interlocutor, it would be good to have some understanding of the texts that they believe. You don't have to believe it, but being familiarized with the scholarship and the history is a good idea. And it requires a lot more than just some sound bites you might hear from some random atheist YouTuber or some random blogger. It goes way past that. But at least having some understanding of how these texts came to be and the scholarship behind it would be useful for debates. So if you're an atheist and you don't think you should bother with learning about the Bible, I think it would massively help. So even just for that reason alone, understanding your opponent's perspective is a good idea. And that's initially what got me down the road of biblical scholarship in general. I was very into debating people, and I wanted to learn about the Bible so I could tear it apart easier. And that was my initial viewpoint. But over time, and after reading the Bible, I learned point 3. Biblical scholarship is super interesting. I mean, seriously, it is absolutely fascinating. Go read, and this is not part of the recommended reading, but if you read a commentary on Esther or the development of the book of Esther, there is so much stuff. It is really cool, and there's just so much textual history and so many differing ideas about what it was used for, the kind of literature it is, and the amount of information. It's just really fascinating. I don't know, I just find the book of Esther really interesting. It's so simple, yet so shrouded in mystery. And I just think that's super interesting. So now I study the Bible through a purely academic context. I mean, and I was doing that before when I got started down this road, but it was for a different purpose. Now I'm just very genuinely interested in the history of the text. It's just really fascinating, man. It's just great to look through all the different ideas and the decades upon decades of scholarship and looking through old texts. It's like putting together a piece of the world's oldest puzzle. And I really hope that someday I can actually do something to put in a piece of my own. And that's why I am currently in college right now for a degree in religious studies, because, I mean, my school doesn't offer biblical studies, otherwise I'd do that. But it'll at least maybe get me down that road. It'll be easier to be accepted into, journals and stuff when I write papers. So those were my 3 main reasons. It's the most influential book in the world, and it'd probably be useful to learn about it. 2, it would actually be helpful for atheists in debates, so that is a self-serving purpose. 3, it's just super interesting, and if you have the time and the patience to wade through all this stuff, it is completely worth it. And it really never ends. It just keeps on going. You can get yourself into a lot of rabbit holes doing this. I know I have. All right, how about we get started with the books that I'm recommending? So the order that I have these in, I have this big stack of 10 books right here. The order that I have these in is chronological. So it's not by order of importance or anything. It's listed by what time period they're talking about. And, some of these, overlap with each other, and that's just to be expected. This is a huge field, and you can't really expect there to be something super concise about it, and, for the whole general topic, and that's probably not going to happen. And so anyways, number 1. Archaeology. Where did the Israelites come from? Did they migrate from the Negev, and that's now kind of the Saudi Arabia region? Were they descendants of Canaanites? Who knows? The thing is, there's a lot of different ideas on that, about the archaeology of the land of the Bible, where they came from. There's a whole bunch of stuff on it, but a good introductory work is The Bible Unearthed by Israel Finkelstein, and who's the other guy? Neil Asher Silberman. I always forget his name. This book will give you a good rudimentary understanding of, the current place in biblical archaeology. If you're looking for a differing viewpoint from this, if you read it and just don't like it, you could go to William Deaver, for example. But I chose this to go for archaeology, talking about the formation and wars of Israel and Judah, and it goes into the Assyrian invasion and the Babylonian exile, and it does talk about where the Israelites came from. It talks about the archaeological evidence. So there's a lot of really good stuff in it. Next, let's talk about another very important book that's actually a part of the Bible, the Torah. Let's talk about the Torah. So this is from Richard Elliott Friedman. Now, I have plenty of disagreements with Richard Elliott Friedman. He has, in my view, a very outdated look on biblical scholarship. That's something you can read about in his book. I'm not going to give you a full review here, but this gives you a good understanding of how scholars look at the documentary hypothesis and the supplementary hypothesis and fragmentary hypotheses. How there were originally different texts that were eventually put together. Maybe some of them circulated together, and he. Well, I disagree with him on the dating. He actually takes Wellhausen's original dating. So if you don't know, there's this guy, Julius Wellhausen. He pretty much is known for being the popularizer of the documentary hypothesis, JEDP. You may have heard of it. So Friedman does discuss that, and he accepts Wellhausen's original dating, which I find to be very problematic. But this gives you a good overview at how scholars look at these texts. And there are a whole bunch of ways to look at it. People divide, every scholar divides it up the way that they see fit, and there's still a hell of a lot of debate on it. And while I disagree with his ultimate conclusions on the dating, this gives you a good way to view the Torah and possibly other biblical books, depending on your ideas for them. But it gives you a good lens to look through, a nice perspective. Next, let's talk about the Deuteronomistic History. So this next book is Thomas Roemer's The So-Called Deuteronomistic History. Now, Thomas Roemer, he's, I don't know what his religious affiliation is, but he is known for definitely having more provocative titles. Don't let the titles scare you away. Whether you be an atheist or a Christian, doesn't matter. His scholarship, I think, is really good. I think he's really smart, and although I sometimes disagree with him, I think he's a really solid author. And this is an introduction to the Deuteronomistic History. So the Deuteronomistic History it includes the books from Joshua through 2 Kings. And it excludes Ruth. Ruth was placed in the middle of those in the Canon, and I'll get to that in a bit. But it includes Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings. That's the Deuteronomistic History. And this book discusses why that is, their divisions, their dating, what is pre-exilic, what's post-exilic, what is exilic, and where did certain ideas come from, where did they get certain syntax or something. So this really puts into context the history of the Deuteronomistic History. And please remember that none of these books should be taken as gospel. They each have their own problems. You can, disagree with a certain part and agree with another part. That's just how scholarship works. Scholars disagree with each other on stuff all the time, and that's okay. That's what scholarship is. You're talking about it. You are working through all the kinks and getting to better hypotheses and better theories to explain all the evidence. And also, please remember that none of the books that I have here today are really complicated. They're not super in-depth. They are not the most comprehensive books you will find on the subject. They are good introductory literature for lay people. So please remember that. Next book, also from Roemer, is The Invention of God. And, I just said he had very provocative titles, and this is one of them. In The Invention of God, Roemer discusses the evolution, the gradual evolution from Israelite polytheism to henotheism to monotheism. And he puts it all in a neat little timeline, and it's just such a great work. There's plenty of evidence to back up the points, plenty of archaeological data. Romer's book covers everything from the name of God to the Ark of the Covenant to Josiah's reforms. It will give you a good overview of how Israelite religion developed over time in the face of different obstacles and new situations. Next, let's hop into a little later period. Now, this is approaching and including the intertestamental period. That is the period, if you can't tell from the name, in between the time the Old Testament was written, or all the books that had already been written, and the New Testament. So this book, J.J. Collins, The Apocalyptic Imagination. This is a great book to help you understand apocalyptic literature, and that includes things like Daniel and Revelation and a whole bunch of others. I mean, the Enochian literature, not everything. It is an introductory book, but so much stuff. And this really puts it all into context, these social situations of these people, their social milieus, and their views, their outlooks, their feelings. It goes over a lot of their philosophies, and of course, eschatology. It's all about, it's almost all about eschatology. In fact, the definition of apocalyptic is actually very interesting. I actually talked about the definition of that word in my video on Revelation. So if you're interested, go ahead and watch that video after you're done here. But The Apocalyptic Imagination by J.J. Collins, pretty much the leading scholar in Jewish apocalypticism, is fantastic for understanding the weird nature of apocalyptic texts. So I highly recommend it. Next, we are finally at the Gospels. So the Gospels are a lot of fun. And L. Michael White's Scripting Jesus, also I'll admit kind of a provocative title, if I could talk. This book is absolutely amazing. The way that he presents it is new and refreshing. The way L. Michael White is discussing the Gospels is in the sense of narrative construction. What each story was meant to show, what it was meant to allude to in the Old Testament, really structuring and writing the Gospels. And it is very in-depth, and the layperson can understand it. It's a great read. I really love this book, honestly. So this next book is from one of my favorite authors, and if you're interested in the topic, maybe he is one of yours as well. This is Bart Ehrman's Lost Christianities. So there are a lot of sects of Christianity that we just don't have anymore. They have been lost over time. They pretty much lost the battle. And of course, the subtitle to this book is The Battles for Scripture and the Faiths We Never Knew. Perfect subtitle. In this book, Ehrman discusses the adoptionists and the Marcionites and the Ebionites and a whole slew of other sects and philosophies and theologies about Jesus and eschatology that existed, in the very early days of Christianity. And eventually they lost out to the proto-orthodoxy, of course, the orthodoxy before there was orthodoxy. Now, I think that has to do in part with the fact that the proto-orthodox authors were just better polemicists than the non-proto-orthodox authors. But of course, I can't make an objective conclusion on that, since we don't really have the writings of the Marcionites or of the Ebionites. We don't really have their writings, but what we have left of the proto-orthodox writing is it does look like they were pretty good polemicists. So it's just conjecture, but that's my own idea. But there's a lot of great stuff in Lost Christianities. It's an easy read. It's a super engaging read. If you're interested in the ancient heresies of the time, give that book a read. It's fantastic. Next, let's hop a little bit later down the line, when there was already scripture, plenty of scripture, scribes would have to transmit things. They would have to copy things, and there were a lot of problems in that. Things got added in, things got taken out for maybe either theological reasons or maybe just pure mistakes. It all happens. And here is where misquoting Jesus, also by Bart Ehrman, comes in. And of course this is a book for a layperson, but it's still a fantastic read. It's not super in-depth that you just get bogged down in different Greek texts, and it's not so simple that you just learn nothing and think to yourself, well, I could have guessed that. Like if you asked me a question that prompted me to think about that, I could have guessed it. But no, this book is fantastic. It talks about some specific cases, like the pericope adulterae. That's the Jesus and the woman taken into adultery. I made a whole video on that and how we know that's not original, or at least the argument for its non-originality. He discusses the longer ending of Mark. There's a lot of great discussion in this book on how texts get added in or taken out, and why, and different textual traditions, and how things were copied. A good amount of that is in here. Now this, of course, is a very basic overview, but that's the whole point of this list. If you're just looking to get into biblical studies, these are some books that will help you along the way. So I highly recommend Bart Ehrman's Misquoting Jesus. Next, a little bit further down the line. Now there is a canon. It used to just be scripture, but now there is a canon, and that is one of the main points of this book. The Biblical Canon by Lee Martin Mcdonald. Now this may be a tome, but the text really isn't that big, and it's this is a very engaging read, honestly. And on the face of it, it kind of seems boring because McDonald talks about different canon lists over time, what people considered canon, what people considered scripture, and he gives plenty of examples and plenty of evidence of things circulating together or not. And in this book, there's a good discussion on the Torah, the intertestamental stuff, the New Testament, all of it. It is all discussed in here. How it became canon is in here. And this is kind of one of those books that is both academic, but yet the layperson can understand it. It is very well written. It's easy to follow. It's well cited. And one of the big reasons I put this book in this list is because it's not filled with jargon. Any person can understand it. And even though it is super academic, it's understandable to people. And that is what I really enjoy about this. This plus the content, of course. But I highly recommend it. Lee Martin Mcdonald's The Biblical Canon. And of course, now that there's a biblical canon, there will be debates about the biblical canon. And there will be debates about the interpretation of the biblical canon. And a whole slew of other things. And a whole bunch of Christologies and theologies. Now we get really philosophical. And in come the first 7 Ecumenical Councils by Leo Donald Davis. This is, of course, an overview. See, it's not very long. This is an overview of the history and theology of the Ecumenical Councils. That includes stuff like Nicaea and Constantinople. And this is a good place to start. There is a lot that is left out, but that is to be expected because it really is an introductory book. It gives you the ideas, a little bit about where they came from, maybe some important events, and then it tells you about the debates that happened during these councils and the decisions that were made, maybe some of the aftermath. But like I said, it's not the most in-depth book, so you won't get confused with complex Christological ideas, but you will understand the development of these theologies and why they developed these certain ways. And even if you don't agree with it, it doesn't really matter. They're in there. It helps you understand the process better. It helps everybody understand how we got here to where we are today. Why is the Trinity understood the way it is, especially. That's a big one. There's a whole bunch of other stuff, but this is a great book, guys. Great book. I recommend it. This is probably the first place I go to when I start videos on councils. I just want to get a good overview, see what I should follow up on, and then I'll get more and more academic, more and more specific. So I start there, take some notes, and then I go into, I guess, more comprehensive, more exhaustive literature about it. So this is a very good place to start if you're wondering about what happened at the councils. In fact, one of the things I really hate from atheists is when they're saying that they either invented Jesus at the Council of Nicaea or invented biblical canon at the Council of Nicaea. Neither of which are true, by the way. I made a whole video on the Council of Nicaea, and I plan to do something on the history of biblical canon as well, but that will take a bit longer, and I'm working on some other projects. But you know what? It doesn't matter. The book's great. Go check it out. In fact, check out all these books. That's the end of the list. And if you stuck around this whole time, thank you for listening. Hopefully, if you're an atheist that listened to the end of this video and you haven't really considered studying the Bible, I consider it. If you have the time, if you have the patience, you can learn a lot. And you learn a lot about pretty much, if we're looking at the Bible, it was written over the course of roughly 1,000 years in total. Through that, you can actually learn about history in general. I'm not saying take it at face value, don't. But I am saying that so many points in the biblical narrative line up with things that actually happened. You can get yourself a good overview of history by reading the scholarship on it. It's actually really fascinating. And then if you're interested in some of those things, go study those things. It's great. Fantastic. Do whatever the hell you want to do about it. But all in all, I think atheists should study the Bible. And I think no matter if you're an atheist or a Christian, you should read these books. They're good books if you haven't. If you're already an academic, great. This video is not for you. This is for lay people. So go ahead. Get these books if you have the time, the money, and all the stuff you need. Make sure you're okay first, because I care about you. I want you to be good. I want you to be safe and happy. You do you, Pikachu. By the way, thank you for watching. My name is Lawrence from Milwaukee Atheists. If you enjoy our videos, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Please consider getting shirts from our Teespring store. All links are in the description. Facebook, Twitter. It's free to follow us on there. What else the hell? What do we have? Is that it? Is that it? No, our wish list, I guess. Maybe our wish list. Yeah, our wish list. Lots of cool stuff on our wish list. If you get the books, we'll use them for videos or even on our streams, depending on what you get. But we use and really appreciate any kind of support we can get. We put in a lot of time and effort into these, and it's just so fantastic to have built the following that we already have. So thank you, everyone, for watching. I care about you. I love you. Drop a like, subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you next time.